The little black girl told the biker her mom's last call pinged from a locked VIP suite no one should enter. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. On a cold and quiet evening, a little black girl, no more than 10 years old, ran frantically towards a group of bikers parked near a street corner. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her voice trembled as she cried out, "Please, you have to help me. My mom. She's locked in a VIP suite at the hotel. She can't get out. Someone's after her." The bikers, in their heavy leather jackets and tattoos, looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. But the urgency in the girl's voice was unmistakable. She was clearly terrified. "Who's after her?" One of the bikers, named Jake, asked, his voice calm but firm. The little girl wiped her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. "I don't know, but she was scared. She called me. Her last call pinged from that room. The VIP suite. She said no one should go in. She was crying. She's in danger." The bikers exchanged glances, the weight of the situation sinking in. They had been enjoying a quiet evening after a long ride, but this was different. A child was in distress, and they could sense that this wasn't a typical runaway or a lost pet. Jake, the leader of the group, stepped forward. He was no stranger to danger, but he had always believed that no one, especially a child, should have to face it alone. "All right, kid," Jake said, his voice softening. "Tell me exactly where she is, and we'll go. We don't leave people behind." The girl, now trembling with relief, pointed towards a nearby hotel. "It's just down the block. They said no one should go in, but I'm scared they're going to hurt her." Jake turned to his crew, who were already readying their bikes. They had seen all kinds of things on the road, but this was personal. "We're not letting anything happen to her," Jake declared. "Get the bikes ready. We leave in 2 minutes." The crew, a group of rugged bikers known for their loyalty, nodded. They trusted Jake's judgment. If he said they were going, they were going. The girl grabbed Jake's arm, her tiny fingers trembling. "Please hurry," she whispered. "I don't want her to be alone." Without another word, the bikers revved their engines, the sound of roaring motorcycles filling the air as they sped down the street. The little girl climbed onto Jake's bike, holding tightly to him, her small frame barely fitting behind him. As they approached the hotel, the night felt heavier, as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for what was to come. The bikers knew the risks. They had lived on the edge their entire lives, but they also knew the meaning of loyalty. And no matter what it took, they would get to that suite and protect this girl's mother. As they pulled into the hotel parking lot, Jake's heart raced. The building loomed ahead, its lights casting eerie shadows on the pavement. He could sense something was wrong, but he wasn't about to back down now. "Stay close, everyone," he ordered. "This isn't just a rescue mission, it's a warning. We don't know who's inside that suite, but we're going in together. I'm coming for you," Jake muttered under his breath as the bikers pulled up to the front of the hotel. The place wasn't too fancy, but it had that seedy, old-town feel to it, the kind of place you wouldn't want to be caught in after dark. Jake shut off the engine of his bike and surveyed the building. His team wasn't far behind, their engines cutting off in a synchronized growl. They all knew what was at stake. No more words needed to be said. They were here, and now it was time to act. The little girl, still holding on to Jake's leather jacket, tugged at his sleeve. "They're in there," she said, her voice trembling. "Please hurry." Jake nodded, his eyes hardening. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll get her out." He turned to his crew, giving them a silent command. The bikers, hardened men with years of experience, knew how to move without a word. They spread out, taking positions at the entrance and watching for any sign of trouble. Inside the hotel, things were quiet, too quiet. The lobby was dimly lit, and the receptionist looked up from her desk with a blank stare, not at all surprised by the sight of the bikers walking in. Jake walked up to the desk, his boots echoing in the silent room. "We're here to see a guest," he said, his voice low and controlled. The receptionist barely flinched. "Room number?" she asked, not even looking up from her computer screen. "VIP suite," Jake said, his eyes narrowing. Maya Jenkins. The receptionist's fingers paused on the keyboard. There was something about the name that caught her attention, but she quickly recovered, tapping away. Room 412, she finally said, her voice flat. It's on the 4th floor, down the hall to the right. Thanks, Jake replied, his voice barely more than a whisper. He turned to his crew, giving them a nod. Let's go. The group moved toward the elevator, the heavy sound of boots against the floor marking their every step. As they approached the elevator, the tension in the air was palpable. The little girl, clutching tightly to Jake's side, hesitated for a moment before speaking again. You have to hurry. My mom, she said no one should go in there. Not even the cops. Jake's face hardened. We're not here to make things worse. But we're getting her out. No one's leaving this place unless it's with her. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the group filed in. As the doors closed, the atmosphere grew even heavier. The little girl was clearly scared, but Jake could see the hope in her eyes. She trusted them. They had to deliver. The elevator hummed as it ascended, the silence only broken by the occasional sound of shifting boots. When the doors finally opened on the 4th floor, Jake's heart skipped a beat. The hallway was quiet, but the air felt thick with danger. His instincts told him that something wasn't right. The little girl's eyes were fixed ahead, her small hand gripping Jake's sleeve tightly. There, she whispered, pointing to the far end of the hall. The door to the VIP suite was slightly ajar, and through the crack, Jake could see a shadow moving inside. His pulse quickened. Stay here, he said to his crew, his voice low. I'll go first. He made his way down the hall, his boots barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. As he approached the door, he paused, listening. He could hear muffled voices from inside. A man's voice, deep and rough, was speaking. She's not going anywhere, not while I'm still breathing. Jake's blood ran cold. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking just enough to alert the man inside. But Jake was already through the door before he could react. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the slats of a curtain. There, sitting on the bed, was a woman, Maya Jenkins, the little girl's mother. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face pale. And standing over her, blocking the door, was a man Jake recognized all too well, Officer Patrick Donovan, the girl's stepfather. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about Donovan, but seeing him in person, standing in front of a terrified woman and child, made his blood boil. Donovan looked up, his cold eyes locking with Jake's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Donovan's lips curled into a sneer. This is none of your business, he growled. You should leave. I'm not going anywhere, Jake said firmly, his voice cold as steel. Not without her. Donovan took a step forward, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. But before he could pull it, Jake was already moving. The fight that ensued was fast and brutal. Donovan was strong, but Jake had the advantage of years on the road, facing down much worse than him. He lunged forward, knocking Donovan off balance, and sent him crashing into a table. Donovan's head slammed against the corner, knocking him out cold. Jake turned to Maya, who was staring at him, wide-eyed and terrified. Are you all right? He asked gently, his voice softening. She nodded, her lips trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake held out his hand, helping her to her feet. We're getting you out of here. Let's go. The little girl, who had been waiting in the hallway, rushed forward, throwing herself into her mother's arms. The bikers stood by, ready for anything. Jake led them all out of the room and toward the elevator, but as they passed the reception desk, the receptionist gave them a knowing look. She had seen enough to know what was going on, but she didn't try to stop them. No one tried. As they rode the elevator down, Jake could feel the weight of the night lifting. They had saved her, just as they had promised. But in the back of his mind, he knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. As the bikers made their way down the hotel's front steps, the atmosphere was tense, but there was a sense of relief in the air. Maya clung to her daughter, her face pale, but her eyes were filled with gratitude. The little girl, Aisha, was still holding tightly to her mother, her small hand tucked securely in Maya's. But the terror that had gripped her was beginning to fade, replaced by the calmness that came with knowing someone had her back. Jake kept an eye out, his hand on the handle of his bike, making sure nothing was about to go wrong. As the group of bikers gathered around, starting their engines, Jake's thoughts were still on Donovan. The man was dangerous, and now Jake knew he had to stay one step ahead. As the last biker revved their engine, Jake turned to Maya, his voice low but reassuring. "You're safe now. We'll get you out of here. But we need to move fast." Maya nodded, still in shock, but feeling the comfort of Jake's words. She'd never thought she'd find herself in a situation like this, but now that she was here, she knew she was in the best hands possible. The bikers took off, the rumbling of their motorcycles echoing through the parking lot as they sped into the night. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jake was determined to make sure Maya and Aisha were protected. They drove in tight formation, each biker keeping a sharp eye on the road, ready for anything. The air was cold, and the sky dark, with only the headlights of the bikes cutting through the darkness. The wind whipped past them, but Jake could feel the tension in the group as they made their way down the highway. They had to get far away from the hotel, and fast. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Donovan wasn't done with them yet. He had connections, and Jake knew that would make him a dangerous enemy. As the group approached a nearby rest stop, Jake signaled for them to pull over. "We're stopping here," Jake said, his voice firm. The bikers parked their bikes in a tight cluster, each one scanning the area. "We can't keep moving forever. We need to lay low for a while." Maya, still holding her daughter close, stepped off the bike and walked toward Jake. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the area. "For now, but we need to be ready. Donovan won't stop. He'll come after you, and anyone else who tries to help you." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I won't let that happen. But we have to be smart about this." Maya took a deep breath and looked at Aisha, who had fallen asleep against her side. She couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in days, she felt like maybe things would be okay. But deep down, she knew they weren't out of danger yet. She looked up at Jake. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake gave a nod, his face unreadable. "We don't leave anyone behind," he said simply. As the group sat in the quiet of the rest stop, the distant sound of a passing truck rumbled in the background. Maya found herself thinking about the days leading up to this moment. The phone call, the fear, the sense of helplessness. It had all been so fast, so overwhelming. But now, sitting here, she felt like there was hope. She reached out and gently stroked Aisha's hair. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not yet. But for the first time, she felt like she was starting to breathe again. The peace didn't last long. A few hours later, as dawn began to break, a familiar, ominous sound broke the silence. The distant roar of a motorcycle engine. The biker's head snapped up, their eyes scanning the horizon. Jake's hand went to his gun, his instincts kicking in. "Stay close," he muttered under his breath. "They're here." It wasn't long before the first of the silver SUVs appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind it as it sped toward the rest stop. Jake's heart raced. He had hoped they'd have more time, but Donovan had caught up faster than expected. "This is it," Jake said, his voice steady. "We're not backing down. Get ready." The bikers spread out, each one moving to position. Maya's heart raced as she heard the sound of the approaching vehicle. She held Aisha tighter, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew she had to trust these men. They had promised to protect her, and she would hold on to that promise with everything she had. As the SUV pulled up, the doors swung open. 3 men stepped out, all wearing the same cold, determined look that Jake had come to recognize all too well. "You don't get to take her," Jake said, stepping forward, his voice unwavering. Donovan, stepping out of the driver's side, gave a harsh laugh. "You really think you can stop me?" he sneered. "You're just a bunch of bikers." Jake didn't flinch. "We protect our own," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Donovan's. "And right now, you're not taking anyone from this group." The tension in the air was thick, but the bikers stood firm, ready to fight for what they knew was right. Donovan, for a moment, hesitated, but then he gestured for his men to move forward. The fight was about to begin. "I can't let you do this," Jake said, his voice low and unwavering as he stepped forward, the weight of his leather jacket heavy on his shoulders. His crew stood by, poised and ready, their eyes locked on Donovan and his men. The tension in the air was palpable. Maya clutched her daughter tightly, her heart racing, but she knew she had to trust Jake. This was their chance to finally escape the nightmare that had been chasing them for so long. Donovan, standing tall in front of the SUV, sneered at Jake. His cold eyes glinted with malice as he took a step forward, his hand resting casually on the gun at his side. You really think you can stop me? I'm a cop. This is my town. Donovan growled, his voice dripping with arrogance. Jake didn't flinch. You're a disgrace, Jake shot back, his tone firm and full of contempt. You'll never be able to hide behind that badge again. Not after what you've done. Donovan's face twisted with rage, and he motioned for his men to move in. The bikers, undeterred, spread out, their hands hovering over their weapons. The standoff had begun. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe they were here, this close to freedom, and yet she was still terrified. She looked down at Aisha, who was clinging to her side, eyes wide with fear. The little girl hadn't said a word since they left the hotel, but Maya could feel the weight of her worry. The bikers had promised to protect them, but the danger was still very real. Jake took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Donovan. Get out of the way, Donovan, Jake said, his voice steady. This ends tonight. Donovan's lips curled into a cruel smile. You think you can just walk in and take her from me? He asked, his voice filled with venom. I've got a lot of power, biker. You're nothing. Jake didn't blink. We'll see about that. In a flash, Jake moved, his hand grabbing the collar of Donovan's shirt and pulling him forward. The air seemed to crackle with the tension of impending violence. Donovan's men immediately reached for their weapons, but the bikers were quicker. In a blur of motion, Jake threw Donovan to the ground, and the rest of the bikers closed in, their bikes roaring like thunder, drowning out any sound of protest. You're not taking anyone, Jake said, his voice cold as ice. Donovan tried to scramble to his feet, but he was surrounded, outnumbered, and outmatched. He knew it was over, but his pride refused to let him go down quietly. You think this is the end? Donovan sneered, his voice thick with hate. I'll make sure you regret this. But Jake just shook his head, his eyes hard and unyielding. You're done, he said quietly. You'll never hurt anyone again. As the bikers restrained Donovan's men, Jake turned back to Maya, who was still holding Aisha close. Are you okay? He asked gently, his voice softening. Maya nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come, she whispered. You saved us. Jake gave her a reassuring smile, his hand resting on her shoulder. That's what family does. We protect each other. The tension began to ease as the bikers stood watch, keeping a close eye on the situation. Maya and Aisha were safe, for now. But Jake knew this wouldn't be the last time they would face danger. Donovan was just the beginning. The bikers had come a long way to get here, but there were still many miles ahead. As Jake helped Maya and Aisha back to the bikes, he glanced at his crew. They were ready. They had faced down threats before, but this felt different. This was personal. Maya climbed onto Jake's bike, Aisha riding in front of her. Jake's hand rested on the throttle, his fingers tightening around it as he revved the engine. Let's get you both out of here, he said, his voice calm but firm. With that, the bikers rode off into the night, the road ahead stretching out before them. The sound of their engines reverberated through the quiet streets as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the chaos of the night. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Donovan wouldn't give up so easily. He had more connections than Jake realized, and now that he knew who the bikers were protecting, he would stop at nothing to get his revenge. Jake's grip on the handlebars tightened. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance as Jake led the way down the highway, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of Donovan. The fight outside the hotel had been intense, but it felt almost too easy, as if Donovan had been caught off guard. Jake had seen it before. Arrogance often led to careless mistakes. But that was over now. They had Maya and Aisha with them, and that was what mattered most. Still, Jake couldn't let his guard down. Donovan was a cop, and cops had resources. He knew the man wouldn't stop. Stay close, Jake said to the group, his voice low but steady. We're not out of the woods yet. The bikers, their faces grim, nodded. They had made it out of the immediate danger, but they all understood the stakes. Maya, who had been quiet ever since the hotel confrontation, looked up at Jake, her eyes still wide with disbelief. How did you know? She asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Jake glanced back at her as they rode. I didn't know for sure. But when you said Donovan was involved, I figured he'd do anything to get you back. He wasn't going to let go that easily. Maya nodded slowly, her grip tightening on Aisha, who was now asleep against her shoulder. She hadn't realized how exhausting the past few days had been until now. It was like the adrenaline had kept her going, but now that they were out of immediate danger, the weight of everything seemed to sink in. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Jake didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken for him. But Maya's words hung in the air, and he couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. He wasn't a man who usually needed gratitude, but knowing he had kept a promise to his fallen friend was enough. They had made it this far together, and he would make sure they went even further. The road stretched ahead of them, the sun beginning to set in the distance, casting long shadows across the open highway. Jake's thoughts wandered briefly to his crew, men who had ridden with him through thick and thin, through fights, losses, and victories. They were a family, and that was something that mattered more than anything. But even family could be tested, and Jake knew that this was just the beginning. As they rode on, the sound of their engines filled the air, a constant reminder of the bond they shared. But Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the future pressing on him. They had done what they set out to do tonight, but Donovan's threat still loomed large. The man wouldn't back down, not when he had so much to lose. And Jake had a feeling he would come back with a vengeance. As they approached a small town, Jake signaled for the group to pull over at a gas station. The sun was low now, casting an orange glow over the landscape. He needed a moment to gather his thoughts, to strategize. "We're taking a break," Jake said, cutting the engine to his bike. "Everyone keep your eyes open." The bikers dismounted, stretching their legs, and heading into the small store for drinks and snacks. Maya and Aisha stayed close to Jake, their presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. Maya's eyes met Jake's as he walked over to them, and she gave him a weak smile. "Are you sure it's safe here?" she asked her, voice still shaky. Jake nodded, though his eyes never stopped scanning the area. "For now," he replied. "But we're not staying long." Aisha, still holding her mother's hand, looked up at Jake with a sense of wonder. "Are we really going to be safe now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake crouched down to her level, giving her a reassuring smile. "You're safe with us," he said softly. "We won't let anyone hurt you." The little girl's eyes searched his face, looking for the truth in his words. After a long moment, she nodded, seemingly satisfied. But Jake knew better. She was just a child, and children could sense things that adults sometimes couldn't. The tension in the air wasn't lost on her. As the group gathered their things and prepared to head out again, Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his old friend Derek, the lawyer who had been working with the club for years. It read, "I've got some bad news. Donovan's already making moves. Be careful. He's pulling strings to get Maya back." Jake's stomach dropped. He knew it wouldn't be long before Donovan made his next move. They had to act fast. "All right, listen up," Jake said, his voice sharp. "We need to move out now. Donovan's got eyes everywhere, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. We can't stay here long." The bikers nodded, their faces grim. They had all known this fight was coming, but now it was real. Jake looked back at Maya and Aisha, his gaze softening for a moment. "Don't worry," he said, his voice steady. "We're not going to let anything happen to you. We'll get you to safety." As the group revved their engines and hit the road again, the tension was thick. But there was something else in the air too, determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jake knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened next, they weren't giving up. They were a family, and they would protect each other, no matter the cost. "I've been tracking you," a voice said from the darkness, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the group. The bikers froze, their hands instinctively going to their weapons. Jake's eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. They were in a small town now, somewhere on the outskirts of the state, far from the chaos they'd left behind. But the quiet was always an illusion. Maya's grip on Aisha tightened, and she looked up at Jake, her face filled with both fear and hope. Jake motioned for the group to stay alert. "Where's it coming from?" he whispered. "Not sure," one of the bikers replied, scanning the shadows of the alleyway they had parked in. The sound of a motorcycle revving faintly in the distance confirmed their fears. It was Donovan's men, tracking them down, just as expected. Jake wasn't surprised. He had known this wasn't over. As the bikers spread out to cover the area, Jake stepped closer to Maya. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice calm but intense. "We're not taking chances." He couldn't afford to lose focus now. His instincts were screaming at him that Donovan wasn't just coming after them. He was coming after Maya, after Aisha, and there was no telling how far he would go to get them back. "We need a plan," Jake said to the group, keeping his voice steady. "We don't have time to wait for reinforcements. We take them down before they can regroup." The bikers nodded in agreement. They had fought together countless times before, but this felt different. This wasn't a simple confrontation. This was personal. "We make sure they don't get near the bikes," Jake continued. "The rest of us will move in fast." No hesitation. The crew dispersed, moving silently as they prepared for what was to come. Meanwhile, Maya could feel the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She hadn't been a part of this world before. But now, it felt like she had no choice but to trust these men. Men who had put their lives on the line for her and Aisha. "Jake," Maya whispered, pulling him aside. "I can't let them hurt you. If something happens—" Jake cut her off gently, looking her in the eyes. "Nothing's going to happen to me, Maya. I'm not leaving until you're safe." Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to believe him. She had to. The sound of an engine grew louder, and Jake's eyes locked onto the horizon. Donovan's men were close now, just around the corner. "Everyone, get ready," Jake said, his voice a sharp command. As the bikers took their positions, the moment stretched out like a rope about to snap. The tension was suffocating. Jake's heart raced, but he focused, blocking out everything except the task at hand. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to let anything break it. As the first man turned the corner, Jake's crew sprang into action. The sound of motorcycle engines roaring to life filled the night air, and chaos erupted in an instant. The bikers moved quickly, efficiently, surrounding Donovan's men, who were still recovering from the shock of being ambushed. Jake saw Donovan's face, twisted with rage, as he stepped out from behind a parked car, his gun raised. But Jake was faster. In a split second, Jake was on him, disarming him with a swift motion and slamming him against the wall. "You're done," Jake said, his voice cold. Donovan grunted, trying to fight back, but he was no match for Jake's strength. His hands shook as Jake pinned him in place. "This is over," Jake repeated, his voice low. "You're not taking anyone from this family again." Donovan's face twisted in a snarl. "You don't know what you're dealing with, biker. I'll have you all arrested. You think you've won." Jake shook his head. "It's not about winning, Donovan. It's about making sure you never hurt anyone again." The sound of another engine revving snapped Jake's attention away for a split second, but it was enough to make him realize they weren't done yet. Donovan's men, though surprised, were still putting up a fight. "Keep them pinned," Jake ordered, turning to the rest of the crew. The bikers closed in, keeping their weapons ready, forcing the remaining men into submission. Maya watched the scene unfold, her heart in her throat. She couldn't believe how quickly everything had escalated. But she knew this was the only way. There was no other choice. "Get him out of here," Jake said to his men, nodding toward Donovan, who was now being escorted away. "We're not done yet. We're getting you both out of here." He turned to Maya, his expression softening. "It's over for now, but we need to keep moving." Maya nodded, finally letting out the breath she had been holding. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake gave her a small smile, his eyes hardening once again as he turned toward the remaining threats. "We protect our own," he said simply, "and we don't stop until you're safe." The bikers quickly mounted their bikes, preparing to leave. But as they sped off into the night, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Donovan would come back. He was too dangerous to be taken down so easily. But for now, Jake had done what he promised. And that was enough. They rode off into the darkness, the sound of their engines a constant reminder of the promise they had made. The road ahead was long, and the fight was far from over. But they were a family, and they would face whatever came together. The road stretched on, endless under the heavy dark sky, and the only sound was the thunderous rumble of the motorcycles cutting through the silence. Jake led the pack, his mind sharp, constantly scanning their surroundings, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of his head. Donovan had been taken care of, for now, but Jake knew it wasn't over. It would never be over until they were completely out of danger. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked into a bigger storm. Maya and Aisha, still huddled close together on the bike, were silent behind him. He could feel the tension in the air, and he knew that it was weighing on them both. The fear was still there, simmering just below the surface, but there was also a sense of relief. They had made it out, but they weren't safe yet. Jake could feel it in his bones. As they continued down the winding highway, Jake pulled over to a small diner off the side of the road. The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow across the deserted parking lot. "We're stopping here," Jake said to the group, his voice calm but firm. The bikers didn't argue. They knew they needed to take a break, regroup, and plan their next move. Maya and Aisha dismounted, the girl's hand still gripping her mother's as they walked inside the diner. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the cold night air, and Maya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The place was empty except for a few locals hunched over their coffee mugs, the low murmur of conversation a dull background to the scene. As Jake and his crew walked in, the chatter quieted for a moment. Maya sat down at a booth by the window, her eyes never leaving Aisha, who was now quietly coloring on a napkin with the crayon she had found. Jake slid into the seat across from them, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maya nodded slowly, her hands shaking slightly. "Yeah, just trying to process everything," she replied, her voice trembling with the weight of it all. Jake leaned back, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. "You're safe here for now, but we need to stay alert." Maya looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't come," she broke off, unable to finish the sentence. Jake didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. He had seen what she meant in her eyes. He had made a promise, and he was going to keep it, no matter what. "You don't need to thank me," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'm doing this because I gave my word. That's all that matters." He paused, glancing over at Aisha. The little girl was coloring, oblivious to the world around her. "It's not just about you, Maya. It's about keeping her safe. She's been through too much already." Maya's gaze softened as she looked at her daughter. "I know," she said quietly. "I just never thought I'd end up in this situation. I was just trying to protect her, keep her safe." Jake nodded. "I get it. But sometimes, we need to let people help us. You can't do it all alone." Maya swallowed hard, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but Jake had already seen it. "We're a team now," he said, his voice gentle. "And no one is going to hurt you again." The weight of his words settled in the room, and for a brief moment, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared, people who would fight for her. As Jake stood to pay for the meal, the sound of a truck pulling into the parking lot caught his attention. His instincts flared, and he stepped toward the window, his eyes narrowing as he studied the vehicle. It was an older model, rusted with age, but it looked like it had been driven hard. It was the kind of truck that didn't belong in this quiet little town. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the gun at his hip. "We need to go," he muttered, turning to the group. "Now." Maya's face went pale, and she grabbed Aisha's hand, standing quickly. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice panicked. Jake was already moving toward the door, his crew falling in behind him. "We've been compromised," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Donovan's men. They found us." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She grabbed Aisha, who was looking up at her with wide, confused eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked, the fear in her voice unmistakable. Jake turned to her, his expression hardening. "We ride. Fast. We don't stop until we're safe." The bikers moved quickly, mounting their motorcycles and starting them up. The sound of the engines revving was deafening, and Jake led the charge, the rest of the crew falling into line behind him. They couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. The truck in the parking lot had already started to pull out, and Jake knew they had no time to waste. As they sped down the road, the night stretched on before them, the horizon dark and uncertain. But one thing was clear, Donovan wasn't going to give up easily, and neither was Jake. He would protect Maya and Aisha with everything he had, no matter what it took. The roar of the motorcycles faded into the night, but the unease remained. Jake's eyes were focused, scanning the road ahead, every instinct on high alert. They had to keep moving. Donovan's men were getting closer, and Jake knew it was only a matter of time before they were caught up in a more serious confrontation. The tension in the air was thick as the bikers, moving as one, sped down the highway. The adrenaline kept Jake sharp, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that their next move could decide everything. Maya, holding Aisha close, was silent behind him, but Jake could feel the weight of her fear. She was trying to stay strong, but he knew how much she was struggling. She was a mother, and her whole world had been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. They were all running now, but for her, this was more than just running from danger. It was running for her daughter's future. "Stay close," Jake said, his voice firm as he glanced back at the group. "We're not stopping until we're far enough away to breathe." The others nodded, the sound of their engines roaring in unison as they rode through the night. They had become a well-oiled machine, each biker knowing their role, each of them looking out for the others. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting the ones who couldn't protect themselves. As they reached a small town on the outskirts, Jake slowed down, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The last thing they needed was to draw attention. They needed to lay low, but Jake wasn't sure how long they could keep this up. "We'll stop here," Jake said, pulling into a quiet gas station just off the highway. "Get what you need, but keep it quick." The bikers parked their bikes, dismounting with practiced efficiency. Maya and Aisha stayed close to Jake, their presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. As Jake stepped inside the gas station, he kept his eyes on the door, never letting his guard down. He was aware of the strange looks they were getting from the few locals who were scattered around the store. It didn't take much to make someone suspicious. The last thing they needed was for someone to make a phone call. Maya looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think they're still following us?" she asked, her face pale and tired. Jake met her gaze. "I'm sure of it," he said, his voice low. "But we're not sticking around to find out. We're heading north." Maya nodded, but Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. They hadn't had a real chance to rest in days, and every mile they put behind them only brought more danger. He could see it in the way she carried herself, her shoulders sagging with the weight of everything she had been through. Aisha, on the other hand, was still a little beacon of light in all of this. The little girl was trying to stay strong, but Jake could tell she was scared. Maya had done a good job of shielding her from the worst of it, but the fear was still there. Jake stepped to the counter, his hand reaching for his wallet. As he paid for the gas, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, eyes scanning the screen. It was a message from Derek, the lawyer who had been helping them. Asterisk, "You need to move. Donovan's men have been talking to people in town. They're getting close." Asterisk, Jake's stomach dropped. He'd known it was coming, but the urgency of the message made his pulse quicken. "We need to go," Jake said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." The bikers quickly finished what they were doing and mounted their bikes again, the engines roaring to life. Jake motioned for Maya and Aisha to get on, his eyes scanning the road. There was no time to waste. They had to keep moving before Donovan's men caught up. "Hold on," Jake said to Maya as he revved the engine. "We're going to put some distance between us and them." They sped out of the gas station parking lot, the sound of their bikes filling the night air as they raced down the highway. As they left the town behind, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Donovan's men weren't just hunting them. They were getting smarter, more coordinated. They had resources, and Jake knew that meant they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The wind whipped past them as they traveled, the miles stretching out like an endless road with no end in sight. Jake kept his focus on the road, but his mind was racing. Where could they go next? Who could they trust? The farther they got, the more desperate Donovan would become, and the more dangerous it would be for everyone involved. As the night wore on, Jake felt his muscles tense, the weight of the situation pressing on him. This wasn't just about protecting Maya and Aisha anymore. This was about facing down a man who wouldn't stop, no matter the cost. The bikers sped on through the darkness, their bikes slicing through the cold air as they headed north, hoping that, somehow, they could outrun the storm that was following them. But Jake knew deep down that it wasn't just about outrunning it. It was about surviving it. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The sound of the motorcycles reverberated through the darkened highway, the tires humming against the asphalt as Jake and his crew pushed forward, trying to outpace the looming danger. The weight of the situation was pressing on him. Every mile they covered felt like a countdown, time running out before Donovan's men caught up. He could feel the tension building, every turn, every shift of the wind, heightening the sense of urgency. Behind him, Maya held Aisha close, her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter as they clung to the bike. He could tell she was exhausted, both physically and mentally, but she hadn't said a word. Aisha, too, had been quiet, her small frame pressed against her mother. Jake glanced back at them briefly, seeing the fear in their eyes. He knew that they were looking to him for protection, and he wasn't going to let them down. "We need to stop soon," Jake said, his voice firm but quiet, the wind carrying his words away as he spoke. "Find a place where we can rest for a bit." One of the bikers nodded in agreement, pulling up alongside Jake. "There's a small town up ahead," the biker said. "We can lay low there for a while, maybe find a motel." Jake glanced at the horizon, the faint outline of a town coming into view. It was their best shot for the moment. "All right," Jake said, nodding. "We'll stop there. Keep your eyes open, though. We don't know how far behind they are." As they entered the town, Jake could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The place was quiet, too quiet, and the few streetlights flickered in the night. The last thing they needed was to attract attention. He led the group into a small, dimly lit motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it would do for a quick stop. The parking lot was nearly empty, and Jake took that as a good sign. They could blend in here for a little while. "We're staying here," Jake said, turning to the others. "Keep it quiet, get what we need, and we're out fast. No need to draw attention." Maya dismounted from the bike, Aisha following her, still clutching her mother's hand. Jake's gaze lingered on them for a moment before he turned to the rest of the crew. "Let's keep watch. No one leaves without telling the others." The group nodded, spreading out and checking the area, while Jake and Maya went inside. To secure a room. The fluorescent lights inside the motel office buzzed faintly as the clerk, a tired middle-aged man, looked up from his paperwork. Jake stepped forward, his expression neutral. "We need a room for a few hours," Jake said, his tone calm. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed Jake a key and pointed toward a room at the far end of the building. Jake didn't hesitate. "Thanks," he said, taking the key. He glanced over at Maya, who was standing near the door with Aisha, her face pale but determined. "Let's go," he said, gesturing for them to follow. Inside the room, the door clicked shut behind them, the lock engaging with a soft thud. Jake immediately moved to the window, peeking out through the blinds to check the parking lot. His mind was still racing, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. They were being hunted, and they had to stay one step ahead. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, holding Aisha close, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. Aisha, still exhausted, had her eyes closed, but Maya knew she was just as frightened as her. "What happens now?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We rest for a bit," Jake replied, his eyes never leaving the window. "But not for long. We keep moving." Maya nodded, her shoulders slumping as the weight of the situation settled back onto her. She had hoped for some peace, a brief moment to breathe, but that hope was fleeting. The fear, the uncertainty, they were all still there. She looked at Jake, his back still turned as he watched the parking lot. She could see the lines of stress on his face, the tension in his posture. He was trying to hold it together, but she could tell he was just as exhausted as she was. "Thank you, Jake," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Jake didn't turn around, but he gave a small nod. "It's what we do," he said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just about promises or protection. It was about loyalty, about doing what was right, no matter the cost. He turned from the window and glanced at Maya, his expression softening for a brief second. "We'll get through this. Together." Maya gave him a small, weary smile, but she knew the truth. They hadn't won yet. The fight was still ahead, and it would only get harder. As the night wore on, the bikers kept watch, the sounds of the highway outside muffled by the walls of the motel. Maya lay down on the bed, her arms still around Aisha, but sleep was elusive. Her mind kept racing, replaying every moment of the past few days, the fear, the uncertainty, the danger. How long would they be able to keep running? How long until Donovan's men caught up to them? Jake's voice broke through her thoughts. "We'll be ready," he said quietly, sensing her unease. "They won't get us. Not tonight." Maya closed her eyes, holding on to his words. She had to believe him, for Aisha's sake, and for her own. The silence in the room felt heavy, the weight of the coming storm pressing in on them. But in that moment, Maya allowed herself a small flicker of hope. They were safe for now, and that had to be enough. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the quiet town. Jake's eyes fluttered open, the harshness of the past few days still lingering in his bones. The stillness of the motel room was a strange contrast to the chaos they had left behind, but he knew it wouldn't last. Donovan's men weren't far behind, and Jake could feel it in his gut. Every passing minute, every mile they traveled, felt like a countdown. The promise he had made to Maya echoed in his mind. He would keep them safe, no matter what it took. As the others began to stir, Jake stood up, his movements deliberate, his mind focused. He had to make sure they stayed one step ahead. The sound of a door creaking open caught his attention, and he turned to see Maya walking toward him, her tired eyes meeting his. Aisha was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket, her small form tucked safely under the sheets. Jake gave her a nod, his voice low and steady. "We need to move. It's time." Maya nodded, her face weary but determined. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. "We're going north," Jake replied, walking toward the door. "There's a place up ahead, a few 100 miles away. We'll lay low there for a bit, get our bearings." He paused for a moment, looking back at Maya and Aisha. "We won't stop until we're far enough out of reach." Maya stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "Jake, I don't know how to thank you. You've already done so much for us." Jake gave her a brief smile, his gaze softening. "You don't need to thank me. I'm doing what I promised. We protect each other. That's all there is to it." He turned toward the others, signaling for them to get ready. They had no time to waste. The rest of the crew, though tired, moved with purpose, ready to go. They mounted their bikes and revved their engines, the sound cutting through the early morning stillness. Jake took his place at the front of the group, the familiar hum of the motorcycle beneath him both grounding and comforting. As they pulled out of the parking lot and back onto the highway, Jake's thoughts drifted to Donovan. He had been expecting trouble, but the last confrontation hadn't gone as he had anticipated. Donovan was resourceful, and Jake knew that the man wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. The road ahead was winding and uncertain, but Jake didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to. As they passed through small towns and endless stretches of empty highways, Maya's voice broke the silence. "Jake," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "What if they catch up to us? What if they find us again?" Jake glanced over at her, his expression hardening. "We'll fight, and we'll keep running if we have to. But we're not going down without a fight." He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was also something else, a glimmer of hope. She was starting to believe, just as he had, that they could make it out of this. "Don't worry," Jake added, his tone softer now. "I won't let them take you." The miles continued to slip away, the sound of their engines a constant reminder of the danger that still hovered around them. But even as the road stretched on, Jake remained vigilant. He had learned long ago that nothing in this life was guaranteed. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. That was the only way to survive. As they reached the outskirts of a small town, Jake signaled for a stop. They couldn't afford to risk being spotted, especially not now. The crew parked their bikes in the shadows, making sure to blend in as much as possible. Jake motioned for Maya and Aisha to stay close. "We'll stay here for the night," he said, "just until we figure out what's next." Maya nodded, but Jake could tell she was still on edge. They had all been running on adrenaline for so long, and it was starting to take its toll. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked, her voice low. Jake looked around the quiet town, the stillness of it almost too perfect. "As safe as it's going to get. But we can't stay here long." He turned toward the crew. "Keep watch. We'll leave by morning." The rest of the crew nodded, their expressions set in determination. They had all seen the worst, and they knew how to handle what was coming. As the night wore on, Jake remained outside, keeping an eye on their surroundings. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not now. Not when they were so close. He could feel the weight of his promise to Maya and Aisha bearing down on him. He had sworn to keep them safe, and he wasn't about to break that promise. As the night deepened, the group settled in for the rest. But Jake's thoughts never stopped. He knew Donovan's men were still out there, and they would come for them soon. The question was, where would they go next? And when they did, would they be ready? He had no answers yet, but he wasn't going to stop fighting until he had won. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The sun had barely risen when Jake decided it was time to move again. The quiet night they had spent in the small town was over, and the creeping sense of danger was back in full force. He could feel it in the air, a weight pressing down on him, urging him to act before Donovan's men closed in. He wasn't about to let down his guard, not when they were so close. "Time to go," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the urgency of the situation. The bikers, still half asleep, sprang into action. They had learned to be quick, to move as one unit. Maya and Aisha were already up, packed, and ready to leave. Maya's face was tired, her eyes still haunted by the events that had unfolded, but she was strong. Aisha, too, was more alert now, holding on to her mother as they mounted the bike. Jake glanced at the horizon, seeing the faint traces of light begin to break through the night. There was no time to waste. "We're not stopping for anything," Jake said, his tone resolute. He revved his bike, the engine's roar cutting through the still morning air. The crew followed, and they hit the road once again. As they sped down the highway, the sound of their motorcycles echoed in the vast emptiness, a steady rhythm that kept them focused. But Jake's mind never stopped. He couldn't ignore the gut feeling that Donovan's men were getting closer. They had to get ahead, and fast. "How far is it?" Maya asked, her voice strained but still strong. "A few 100 miles, Jake answered, his gaze never leaving the road. "We'll make it before sunset if we keep up the pace." Maya nodded, but she didn't speak again. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had tried to keep her fear in check, but it was harder now. The relentless chase, the constant threat, it was wearing her down. And Aisha, her sweet little girl, was too young to understand any of it. Maya reached out, squeezing Aisha's hand tightly, trying to reassure herself. "We'll be okay," she whispered to herself. Jake led the group as they continued down the highway, the road stretching out before them like an endless ribbon. The land around them was desolate, with nothing but barren fields and empty highways. The only thing that kept them moving was the hope that they would find a safe place, somewhere far away from the nightmare that had followed them. Hours passed, and the sun began to climb higher in the sky. The crew didn't stop for rest. They couldn't afford to. Every minute counted. Maya's hand tightened around the handlebars as they hit a stretch of rough terrain. The road was full of potholes and bumps, but Jake handled it expertly, guiding the bike through the uneven patches. He knew that every mile was bringing them closer to a place where they could finally stop and regroup. As they neared a small town, Jake slowed down, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He wasn't sure why, but something felt off. The town looked empty, almost too quiet. "Stay alert," Jake ordered, his voice cutting through the silence. The bikers nodded, their eyes scanning the streets as they passed. It didn't take long before Jake spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. A silver SUV parked on the side of the road. It was the same model they had seen before, the same one Donovan's men had been driving. He pulled over, signaling for the others to do the same. "This is it," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with tension. "They've caught up." Maya's heart raced as she saw the SUV. She knew what it meant. Donovan's men were close. She turned to Jake, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" "We fight," Jake said, his voice calm and firm. "And we don't back down." The bikers dismounted quickly, positioning themselves strategically around the vehicles. Jake's eyes stayed locked on the SUV, waiting for any movement. The silence was deafening. Suddenly, the doors of the SUV opened, and two men stepped out, their expressions cold and determined. They didn't look like they were here to negotiate. "This is our last chance," one of them said, his voice low and threatening. "You give up the girl, and we walk away." Jake didn't hesitate. "Not happening," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his side. "You want her, you're going to have to go through me." The two men exchanged glances, sizing Jake up. They clearly hadn't expected a fight. "We don't have time for this," the second man growled. "Get out of our way." But Jake stood firm, his eyes narrowing. "I said no. You're not taking her." Without warning, the first man lunged at Jake, but Jake was faster. He sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. The second man reached for his own weapon, but before he could pull it out, Jake's crew closed in, taking him down with swift precision. Within moments, both men were on the ground, immobilized. Jake stood over them, his chest rising and falling with the rush of adrenaline. "Get up," Jake ordered, his voice cold. "You're going back to Donovan with a message. This is the last time you come after us." The men struggled but knew they were beaten. "This isn't over," the first man spat, his eyes burning with fury. "We'll be back." Jake didn't say anything. He turned and walked back to his bike, his crew following suit. "Let's move," Jake said, his voice hard. "We're not sticking around." As the bikers mounted their bikes and revved their engines, Jake glanced back at Maya and Aisha. They were safe, for now. But Jake knew the battle wasn't over. Donovan would come for them again. But this time, they would be ready. The road stretched ahead, but the shadows were getting longer, and Jake could feel the weight of the chase pressing harder on him. The adrenaline from the fight earlier had faded, but the reality of the situation was settling in. Donovan's men had been easy to take down, but Jake knew that wasn't the end of it. The enemy wasn't just some nameless thugs. Donovan was a cop, someone who knew how to fight dirty, and Jake could almost feel the wheels turning in Donovan's mind as he regrouped. He had a feeling the worst was yet to come. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, his voice sharp as he glanced at the crew. Maya and Aisha were riding with him, and although the little girl had stayed silent, Jake could feel her fear, and Maya's too. The long stretch of road before them was empty, almost desolate. It wasn't the kind of place that invited stopping. Jake turned back to Maya, her face pale but determined. "We'll make it," he said, though he knew the words didn't carry the comfort they once did. Maya nodded, her grip tightening around Aisha, who was still clinging to her mother. Her eyes were wide, but she hadn't said anything for hours. Maya could tell the exhaustion was wearing on both of them, but she wasn't ready to stop yet. She couldn't. The moment they stopped, it would be over. Donovan would find them, and everything they had worked for would be lost. Maya glanced at Jake. "How far?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Not far," Jake replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll be in a safe spot by nightfall." The sun was beginning to dip lower, casting a long shadow on the road ahead. There was a sense of finality to the way the light faded, as though the day itself knew they couldn't afford much more time. They had to make it to the next town, and they had to do it before Donovan could close the gap. Maya could feel her pulse quicken, but she held on, her mind focused on keeping Aisha calm. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about protecting this little girl who had already been through too much. As the miles passed, the tension didn't subside, it grew. Every turn, every stretch of road, felt like a test. Jake kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing. He kept thinking about the fight, about Donovan's words, and the promise he had made to Maya. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. He couldn't. But Donovan was no ordinary enemy. He was a cop, a man who could move mountains to get what he wanted. The bikers had made a quick decision to stay low, but Jake knew it wouldn't last long. As they approached a small town, Jake slowed his bike, signaling for the others to follow suit. The group rode cautiously into the quiet streets, looking for any sign of danger. The town was small, sleepy, and seemed to be the perfect place to lay low, if only for a little while. Jake pulled into a diner parking lot, his eyes scanning the area. "We'll stop here," he said, dismounting and walking toward the door of the diner. The bikers parked and dismounted, keeping an eye on the surroundings. Maya, still holding Aisha's hand, followed Jake into the diner, her body tense with every step. Inside, the diner was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered at booths. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but Maya could taste the unease in the air. Jake walked up to the counter, giving the server a brief nod before sitting down. Maya sat beside him, her eyes never leaving the door. "You think we're safe here?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked at her, his expression unreadable. "For now," he replied, his tone steady. He knew they had to be careful. Donovan's men could show up any minute. Maya turned her attention to Aisha, who was staring out the window, clearly exhausted. The little girl hadn't spoken a word since they left the motel, but Maya could feel the weight of her silence. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Maya asked softly, her voice full of concern. Aisha turned to her mother and gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm okay, Mommy," she said quietly. Maya's heart broke for her daughter. She wanted to shield her from everything, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when they were in the middle of running for their lives. Jake leaned forward, his eyes scanning the diner. "We won't be here long," he said, breaking the silence. "We need to keep moving. Once we get what we need, we'll go." He looked over at Maya, his voice softening slightly. "You're doing great. We'll get through this." Maya nodded, but the weight of the situation was pressing on her. She wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Donovan wouldn't stop. Not until he had them back. As the minutes ticked by, the feeling of unease grew. Maya looked out the window, her heart pounding in her chest. Every car that drove by made her tense. Every shadow that passed in front of the window made her jump. Jake noticed her unease. "We're good," he said, his voice firm. "We just need to keep our heads down and stick to the plan." The sound of a motorcycle engine in the distance caught their attention. Jake's eyes immediately flicked toward the door. He stood up, motioning for the rest of the group to get ready. "Let's move," he said. The group moved quickly, grabbing their things and heading for the door. As Jake stepped outside, his eyes narrowed as he saw a black SUV pull into the parking lot. His heart skipped a beat. Donovan's men were here. The game had changed. They were closing in. The bikers were ready, but Jake could feel the tension building, knowing that this time, they might not be able to outrun it. The black SUV rolled into the parking lot, its engine purring like a predator closing in on its prey. Jake's pulse quickened as he watched the vehicle stop, the doors opening one by one.
Already prepared to act, he could see it in their eyes. Resolve, determination, and a shared understanding of the stakes. But even with that, Jake knew they couldn't afford to take this lightly. Maya, standing close by with Aisha still clutching her, looked at Jake, her face filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Her eyes searched his, as if silently asking what was next. "We're not running anymore," Jake said quietly, his voice steady. "We'll hold our ground." He turned to his crew, his gaze hardening. "You know what to do. We make sure they don't leave with her." As the bikers stepped forward, spreading out around the perimeter of the diner, Jake motioned for Maya and Aisha to stay close. He couldn't risk them being caught in the crossfire. The rest of the crew followed suit, each of them keeping watch as Donovan's men moved closer. There were 6 of them, their posture aggressive, weapons at the ready. Jake didn't flinch as they approached. He had been through worse before. He knew the fight was coming, and he wasn't about to back down. Donovan stepped out of the SUV last, his eyes narrowing as he saw the bikers surrounding him. "This ends now," Donovan said, his voice cold. "You've got nowhere to run. The girl's coming with us." Jake took a step forward, his expression unreadable. "Not a chance," he said. "You've made a mistake, Donovan. This ends when you leave, not when you get what you want." Donovan's face twisted in anger, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. He had expected a fight, but maybe not one like this. "You think you can just defy me?" Donovan sneered. "I'm a cop. I can make sure you all end up in prison for the rest of your lives." Jake shook his head. "You're a cop, sure, but you're also a criminal. And you've got no power here. Not anymore." Donovan took a step toward him, his hand reaching for his weapon. But Jake was faster. In one swift motion, Jake grabbed Donovan's wrist, twisting it until the man dropped his gun, the metal clattering to the ground. "Not today," Jake growled. Donovan's men hesitated, but it was too late. The bikers had already closed in, surrounding them with the same precision and discipline they had honed over years of riding together. "This is your last warning, Donovan," Jake said, his grip tightening on the man's arm. "We're not giving her up. Leave now, and you can still walk away." Donovan's eyes flashed with rage, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. The tension hung in the air, thick with the threat of violence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Donovan's men looked at each other, and slowly, they stepped back, realizing the fight was already lost. "You think this is over?" Donovan spat. "You think you've won?" Jake gave a small, grim smile. "It's over when we say it is. Get in your car and leave. Now." Donovan hesitated for another moment before finally nodding to his men. The defeat was clear in his eyes. But there was a lingering threat there as well. "This isn't the end. You hear me?" he said, his voice low and full of venom. "We'll be back. And next time, you won't get away so easily." Jake didn't flinch. "We'll be ready." As Donovan and his men retreated to the SUV, the bikers remained on alert, watching as the vehicle pulled away. They knew better than to let their guard down too soon. Maya let out a shaky breath, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and fear. "It's over?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded. "For now. But we've got to keep moving. They'll come back. And when they do, we'll be ready." Maya glanced down at Aisha, who had been quiet throughout the whole confrontation. The little girl's face was still full of confusion, but Maya could see the fear in her eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Maya asked gently. Aisha nodded, though her grip on her mother tightened. "I'm okay, Mommy," she whispered. Jake turned to his crew. "We're not stopping here. We need to keep moving. Head north. There's a place I know. Safe and out of the way." The bikers nodded, already mounting their bikes and starting them up. Jake helped Maya onto his bike, keeping her close. And then they all took off, leaving the diner behind. The highway ahead stretched into the unknown. But Jake felt a sense of clarity. They weren't just running from danger anymore. They were fighting for their lives. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he had a purpose again. No matter what came next, he wasn't going to let them take Maya or Aisha. They were his family now, and he would protect them, no matter the cost.